I'm going to cover various aspects of digital stories, and as a matter of fact, we are going to view some of them. And later on in my presentation, I'll give you guidelines on how you can use this teaching strategy with your students and some of the benefits students get out of making digital stories. But before I do anything, I would like to discuss the reason it's so important for teachers to integrate technology with today's students. Today's students have been transformed by technology, and they're very often referred to as digital natives because their exposure to electronic resources begins at birth. And as a result of this, they learn and they're motivated in different ways from previous generations, than students from previous generations. For these reasons, using technology effectively in school can have many, many benefits. It keeps students motivated. It also helps them function well in today's digital age. And it promotes academic improvement in literacy. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to explain how using digital stories can benefit students in making these academic gains and give you research-based practices that you can use with your own students. Digital stories can also facilitate the learning of subject matter. As a matter of fact, there are teachers out there who make their own digital stories to teach content. And I'm going to give an example later on. One of the reasons digital stories are so beneficial has to do with the fact that when teachers use digital story projects, it allows students to create and perceive content through various formats. They can use audio, video, music, and so on, images. Another reason technology is so important to use today is because professional organizations like the IRA have standards that require teachers to use technology. The International Reading Association, for example, urges teachers to use information and communication technology to prepare students for successful participation in today's digital environment. So when teachers implement technology into their teaching, they are adhering to the standards of many important organizations. One of the leading authors on the importance of technology today is Mark Perensky, who very recently wrote a paper in Educational Leadership, which was published in 2013, arguing that today technology has gotten to be so important that it has replaced reading as the #1 skill for students to succeed in the 21st century. And now I'd like to focus a little on digital stories and how they can be used to benefit students to make academic gains in literacy, and also why, when teachers create their own digital story, they motivate students to learn and make subject matter easier to understand. The first thing that I'd like to do before showing you digital stories is to come up with a definition of what a digital story is. In preparation for my talk today, I contacted the University of Houston because they have a beautiful website entitled Educational Uses of Digital Storytelling, and it has more examples that you can refer to. I'm going to provide you with the URL. And one of the reasons I contacted them is for this reason, to borrow some of their digital stories. But in addition to the digital stories that they have, they also have a very good definition of what a digital story is, and I'd like to read it to you. Digital storytelling, at its most basic core, is the practice of using computer-based tools to tell stories. There are a wealth of other terms used to describe this practice, such as digital documentaries, computer-based narratives, digital essays, electronic memoirs, interactive storytelling, and so on. But in general, they all revolve around the idea of combining the art of telling stories with a variety of multimedia, including graphics, audio, video, and web publishing. Now, it may seem like digital storytelling is relatively new, but it's really not. It may be new in the respect that teachers are using it in school to teach, but in reality, digital stories have been used ever since the early 1990s. One of the co-founders of digital storytelling website that I'm going to refer to you later on is Joe Lambert, and he has been using digital storytelling with adults and with children ever since the early 1990s. But today, more and more teachers and schools are using it as a method of teaching. And this is why it may seem new, but in reality, it is not all that new. Teachers and children with limited technology skills can use digital storytelling effectively. And as I mentioned throughout my presentation today, I'm going to give you strategies on how to get started. So I'm also going to discuss obstacles that will prevent educators from using it and how you can circumvent these obstacles, because some educators are afraid that they're not proficient in technology. However, if you have the right free resources, they can be relatively easy to implement. As a matter of fact, I did not know how to make a digital story myself until recently, and I learned through using free resources on the internet and reading a few articles. So when you have the right resources, they're relatively easy to make. Before I show you the digital stories, there's something else I want to go over, and these are the steps to make a digital story that you can use with your students. When students first work on a digital story, the first step is to write it on paper. So it's as if they were going to hand their teacher an essay. And then later on, the story becomes digitized as students include images, photographs, music, narration, and text, and they integrate everything together into a movie. And there is various software that can be used, like iMovie and Movie Maker, and even other types of software is available. Here are the steps for creating a digital story. As I mentioned, in the very beginning, students write it as a hard copy, and then they sketch scenes to match the narration on a storyboard. And in just a few seconds, I'm going to show you an example of a storyboard. Then students number the text. They number the sections of the text to correspond with the scenes on the storyboard. They then collect graphics that complement the scene, such as photographs and clip art. They then record the narration. They then combine the files into a movie with a movie editing program like Movie Maker or iMovie. And finally, they add a title frame. And here are the examples of the storyboard. There's two ways that you can do these storyboards. You can do them digitally on a computer, or students can do them as a hard copy on paper. The first example is the one done digitally, and here it is right now. And the next one is one done as a hard copy. Another strategy that teachers can use to implement these digital stories is to use Joe Lambert's model for creating effective digital stories. These include point of view, or the author's perspective, a dramatic question that'll capture the viewer's attention, emotional content, which involves powerful emotions, the gift of your voice, using one's own voice to personalize the story, soundtrack, using music that is congruent with the story, economy, using the right amount of information without overloading the viewer, and finally, pacing, progressing at the right pace in order to maintain the audience's interest. Okay, now, as I mentioned, I was going to show you a few examples of digital stories. I have 3 altogether, and these ones are relatively short. They're about 3 minutes each, and I got these through the University of Houston. I contacted them and explained that I was doing a presentation for the International Reading Association and was interested in borrowing some of their digital stories because they're really beautiful, and they have some on just about any topic you can think of. So let me play the 3 that I selected for today. The 3 that I selected are each on different topics. One of them is a historical digital story on the Eiffel Tower. The other one is on math. And the third one is about a runner's experience running in a marathon. So I'd like to start with the one on the Eiffel Tower.
This is the Engines of Our Ingenuity, made possible by the friends of KUHF Houston.
Today, Eiffel builds 2 towers. The University of Houston's College of Engineering presents this series about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. Alexander Gustave Eiffel was born in Dijon in 1832 and trained as an engineer at the École Centrale de Paris. He designed bridges and viaducts in his early life, and he took up architecture later. He was part of a failed French attempt to build the Panama Canal in 1893. As a very old man, he turned his ever-adaptable mind to the new technology of the 20th century, to flight. He designed one of the early wind tunnels. I'd like you to think about a tower he designed that's even more familiar than the Eiffel Tower. But before I do, let's look at the one that carries his name. He built the wild, seemingly mad Eiffel Tower for the 1889 Paris exhibition, and it has marked France to this very day. Who can think of Paris without seeing that pylon rising from its center 1/5 of a mile into the air? Of course, Paris was horrified when it learned what he was up to. A group of famous writers and artists wrote a manifesto against the tower. They said, "We protest with all our strength and wrath against the erection of the monstrous Eiffel Tower, this arrogant ironmongery, this disgraceful skeleton. Even commercial America wouldn't want it." That's not so much short-sightedness as it is a reminder that new ideas are alien, no matter how good they are. Eiffel was soon vindicated. Visitors to the fair quickly repaid the costs of building the tower. He was also vindicated in the long run by all of us who, quite simply, regard the tower as beautiful. In 1887, Eiffel wrote about his intentions. He'd left the steel work open for the practical purpose of reducing wind loads on the structure. However, he absolutely understood the aesthetics of what he was doing. He says, "The curvature of the monument's 4 outer edges, as mathematical calculation dictated it, will give a great impression of strength and beauty." The remark about commercial America in the artist's manifesto was ironic, because 5 years earlier Eiffel had designed the huge steel tower inside the Statue of Liberty. The Eiffel Tower, for all its grace, did have a hard commercial side, but Liberty truly symbolized the ideals of both France and America. The 2 structures contrast starkly. Liberty, until recently, was the largest statue ever made. She presents a graceful copper shell, but she rides on Eiffel's vast invisible skeleton. Liberty speaks explicitly to the French and American love of freedom. The Eiffel Tower makes no such iconographic appeal. Its purpose is the structure itself, no more than simple beauty in its own right. And so Eiffel shifted smoothly between 2 radically different aesthetic aims. It's wonderful enough to have stamped 2 countries with their identifying monuments, but to have done so in such completely different ways, well, that truly is magical. I'm John Lienhard at the University of Houston, where we're interested in the way inventive minds work.
Okay, so that was the first one. Before I show you the second one, is the sound loud enough? Can those of you sitting in the back hear? Okay, what I can do is put my microphone near the computer here.
This is the engines of our ingenuity, made possible by the friend.
Okay, the second one is called A Day Without Math.
Is it? Is it?
I think math is really stupid. When am I going to use algebra in the real world?
Math is so pointless. It doesn't apply to me at all.
We hear these complaints time and time again as math teachers. But what if we really did away with math? How would our lives be different? Would they be affected at all? I present to you A Day Without Math. You wake up one morning. You don't know which morning because no calendar is in existence without calculations of lunar pattern. You're late. Only you don't know you're late because time doesn't exist without calculations of solar patterns. You roll out of bed. Only it's not a bed. It's a ragged piece of cloth on the ground because without geometry there are no dimensions to create a mattress or even to measure the sheets to cover it. You leave your room. Only instead of a door frame, you simply walk to the other side of an oddly shaped space because without math, there is no architecture to create structurally sound habitats. You enter your kitchen.
I'm having an old friend for dinner.
Okay, only it's really just a lot of spoiled food because proportions couldn't be used to add the right amounts of preservatives or fertilizers, and the expiration dates are not even printed because no one was able to determine the average amount of time it takes for food to no longer be consumable. You run out of your front door panicking. Okay, it's more like running out of the open front of a cave. Into the street. Okay, it's just a strip of mud between you and your neighbor's cave across the way. You start to scream from the frustration, hoping someone will hear you and help you out. But since you have no sense of distance or the speed of sound, you don't realize that your neighbors across the way are in fact several miles from you. What has become of your world? Is math not a vital part of the life you live even as a teenager today? Whether we like to admit it or not, math is all around us. It helps us understand distance, build roads and homes, keep our food fresh, keep us warm and comfortable, and basically keep us sane. So today, I invite you to consider your own lives and whether or not you could handle a day without math.
That was the second one. And finally, the third one, as I mentioned, is about a runner's experience running a marathon and is entitled Mile 20.
Sometimes they came on those cold and rainy Saturday mornings. I'd arrive at Memorial Park at 5 a.m. to do a 2 or 3 hour run with my training group. Other times they came when I took off my socks and saw blisters so huge that I knew I'd be wearing slippers to work for days. Coaches and veterans say that marathon runners hit the wall at mile 20. That's when you start to question why you're running the marathon and whether you'll be able to finish it. For me, There were hundreds of mile 20s. They started in the training program and continued until I crossed the finish line. I expected the physical ones. I was a bit surprised by the mental ones. Yogi Berra once said, 90% of baseball is half mental. He spoke like a long-distance runner. I found that oftentimes during a run, my mind tired more quickly than my body. After a few miles, subtly sabotaging thoughts would begin to surface. That little voice that said, I'm tired today. It's okay if I cut this run short. The mile 20s were less intense on January 18th, 1998, the day of my first marathon. I had a lot to keep me going. $1,000 in pledges for a local charity, and friends and family meeting me along the way. I crossed the finish line 5 hours and 22 minutes after I started, and I was exuberant. I'd accomplished the greatest physical and mental challenge in my life. Completing a marathon forever changed my life for the better. I've become a lifelong athlete dedicated to taking care of my body. I've developed the will to stay focused on completing the run, the task, or the commitment, a strength that carried me through that very tough year when my business partnership of 7 years fell apart and I began a new career as a consultant. I've encouraged others to take up marathoning. On January 15, 2006, I walked the Houston Half Marathon with my friend Shirley, who had the goal to complete it before her 70th birthday 3 days later. Run a marathon, change your life is the slogan of the Houston Fit Marathon Training Program. It certainly did for me.
Okay, and that was the third one. And what I'd like you to do next is, before I discuss my research, I wrote a peer-reviewed topic, a peer-reviewed paper on digital storytelling discussing how they benefit students, which is going to be published very soon in a journal called Reading Improvement. Before I share my research with you relating the way how these digital stories benefit students, I'd like you to do a group activity and to jot down any ways you believe these digital stories can help students improve in important components of literacy, such as vocabulary, fluency, reading comprehension, and just jot down a few of your thoughts, and then I can share with you the latest research on the ways these digital stories benefit students. So please collaborate with a partner. It can be somebody on your right, on your left, in front of you, or behind you. And for just a few minutes, jot down a few thoughts, and then I can share with you the research regarding the way these digital stories benefit students, and the way they can also benefit students when teachers create them to teach content. So let's do that for a few minutes, about 5 minutes, and then later I can reconvene and share with you the research on these digital stories. Storytelling in improving teaching. Would anybody like to share what they wrote?
We were talking about how it's a good way to involve all sorts of different strengths of your students. If you have a student who speaks very well, they can do the narration. If you have a student who is more focused on or enjoys drawing, they could draw pictures to go along with whatever they're narrating. You can have a student who's doing the filming and the editing. So it's really a chance for your students to share their strengths with their classmates in the final product.
Absolutely. It's a form of differentiated learning, and that's one of the reasons it benefits struggling learners. Any other thoughts? All right, in that case, I can share the research on these digital stories. First of all, they're very motivating, and that in itself is very, very important. When students are unmotivated to read, for example, they don't practice reading, and as a result, they don't make progress. So the motivation factor itself is very, very powerful. And using methods of teaching that match the way today's students communicate and learn is very, very important. So that in itself can help students make academic gains. And in just a few seconds, I'm going to give you specific strategies that can be used for reading comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency. But before that, let me discuss writing and how the creation of these digital stories helps students improve in writing. When struggling writers create a storyboard, they gain a better understanding of the story sequence, and this helps them realize the parts of the story they may have omitted in the traditional draft. And this allows students to go back and include any missing components that they may have left out. And it is the differentiated manner that of the feedback that students get from the various formats, like we just mentioned, involving images, sound, and so on, that help them find the missing components and rewrite the story to make it better. Students can also make improvements in reading comprehension if teachers use something called digital storytelling circles. Traditional literature circles promote reading improvement because they encourage dialogue and discussion, and these are crucial aspects of comprehension instruction. When teachers use digital storytelling circles, they break students into small groups, 3 to 5 students per group, to read the same text, and then students create a digital story of the text. After all the students in the digital storytelling circle have finished reading, the teacher assigns them group members. The teacher assigns the members of the group specific roles: producer, director, editor, and students benefit because they exchange ideas, decide on the purpose of the story, and gain or improve the skills needed for digital movie making. As I mentioned, students can also improve in fluency and vocabulary. Students can improve in fluency if instructors assign them to work on one-on-one with peers to rehearse their narratives until they can read them well. And they can also enhance their vocabulary when their teachers encourage them to use new, accurate, and powerful words. And I already mentioned the way that they can motivate students to read. Basically, because they're motivating to do, teachers can use something called book trailers to motivate children to read more. Book trailers have been successfully used for this purpose. Book trailers are 2 to 3 minute digital stories designed to persuade viewers to read a text. The trailers need to include the title and author of a book, and students are also required to analyze it. The process of making book trailers requires students to read and reread a text, select images representing the content of the book, and write a script reflecting the content and the message students want to convey. I mentioned earlier in my presentation that some teachers are making digital stories themselves in order to make content more fun for students to learn. And nowadays there is something called a flipped classroom, where instead of giving a lecture in class, in school, teachers make these lectures on video, and they can be as digital stories that students view as at home rather than in school. And this gives teachers more opportunities to help students with problems in school rather than wait and get their homework and find out where their weaknesses are. Another advantage of teaching in this manner is that students can view the digital story at their own pace. When teachers lecture in class, they often give the lecture too fast for some students and too slow for other students. But when the students have it on a video as a movie or a digital story, they can view it at their own pace. And in addition, the digital stories very often they make content come to life. they're more fun for children to view. And this is another reason they can be beneficial. In doing my research for my presentation today, I read about a teacher who was doing this in a publication called Middle School Journal. And I'd like to read an excerpt from that article that shows the power of these digital stories. The teacher's name is Tyler Binley, and here is the excerpt. Tyler Binley, a teacher at Palmyra Middle School in Pennsylvania, uses digital storytelling to capitalize on his middle school students' interest in digital video to teach them math concepts. And his students find them very helpful and go to his YouTube site when they struggle with a math task. I was just talking about the flipped classrooms. Some schools are saving a lot of money by providing all their instruction on video and using digital stories and video, and they're not even purchasing books. There have been a few articles on this topic, and I wrote an article myself. All right, in this part of my presentation, I want to give you information about digital storytelling projects, about how to start them. Earlier I mentioned obstacles and what will prevent a teacher from not using them. One obstacle is fear of not doing good digital stories. And this is really not a good reason because these are relatively simple to implement with free resources on the internet. So the first step in creating a digital story is knowing how good ones appear. And that's the reason I showed you the 3 that I did. And I'm going to refer you to other websites in addition to the one that I used. The one that I used, as I mentioned, was produced by the University of Houston and is titled The Educational Uses of Digital Storytelling. And this is the URL right here. Now, after I'm done with my presentation today, if you want a copy of this PowerPoint to use the resources, just write me an email. I will provide you with my email address, and I'll be happy to send it to you. In addition, let me talk a little bit more about the University of Houston's website. I mentioned earlier that they contain many topics, and I have some of the topics here for you that they've done digital stories on. They've done one on bullying, for example, banned books, stress and education, adapting to a new culture. There's even one on Superman. There's one on technology. There are historical ones, including one on the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it's a really beautiful website to visit, and I strongly recommend it because they have digital stories categorized by topic. Another noteworthy website is Creative Narrations. This one is an organization that uses storytelling for self-discovery and strengthening relationships. It was founded in 2001 to support organizations with multimedia tools to document perspectives of change. And it also includes a variety of topics. For those of you who teach elementary school, this one may be particularly helpful for you because this one has examples of digital stories done by children. And this one is called the East of England Broadband Network. It's developed by the Government of England to improve teaching and learning by the use of broadband technology. And it includes, as I just mentioned, numerous digital stories done by children. And finally, there is the Center for Digital Storytelling. This is the one that is co-founded by Joe Lambert. And this one also has numerous digital stories on different topics. I've chosen some topics here for you that you can find digital stories on. There are some on cancer, education, family, youth, and health and human services. All right, and now I would like to give you ideas on how to learn to make a digital story. As I mentioned, they seem a lot harder than they really are. I myself was a little intimidated when I saw the beautiful digital stories and thought that it would require a lot of work, but they're actually quite simple to learn how to do. I learned myself by reading a few articles which gave me the URLs for various tutorials which you can find on YouTube. And what I did then was just search for tutorials, and I copied some of the keywords that I used to give you ideas on how you can do the same thing. For example, if you know that you have Movie Maker on your computer or that you have iMovie, you can try typing something like digital storytelling with Movie Maker or digital storytelling with iMovie, and you'll get a few hits, and that's basically how I learned. I viewed these tutorials. I then found some that I felt were particularly helpful, and then when I got stuck, I tried typing a few other keywords, and I got other tutorials, and through trial and error, by watching tutorials and practicing on my computer, I was able to make some very beautiful digital stories similar to the ones that we saw earlier. So this is one way that you can start a digital story and learn how to do it. If you are unsuccessful, another strategy that I found when I was reading one of the articles for my research is to ask a media expert at your institution. Media experts are very often eager to come to your class and share their knowledge of technology and help you with such a project. I mentioned at the start of my presentation that I was going to talk about some obstacles. One obstacle is that teachers feel that they don't have the technology skills. And this is really not a good reason, because all of these resources that I referred to you are free, and they can help you do very nice projects. There is, however, an obstacle that various teachers may not have too much power over, and that is the age of accountability that we live in. Very often, district personnel will visit your classroom and require you to be doing a specific strategy at a particular period of time, and there's really not that much you can do. However, if you do enjoy freedom to experiment with alternative ways of teaching, digital stories are a very good strategy to use for the reasons that I mentioned. I do want to save some time for questions, so let me get to my conclusion and give you an opportunity to ask some questions. So basically, I will conclude by highlighting the main points that I made. When students create digital stories, they very often make academic gains for various reasons. First of all, as I mentioned at the start of my presentation, today's students are accustomed to technology. They use it a great deal out of school. It's their preferred way of communicating and learning. And very often, when teachers don't include technology into their teaching, students get bored. Mark Perensky does a good job of documenting that in many of his papers. So the motivating aspects of digital technology make them one of the preferred ways for students to learn how to improve in vocabulary and literacy and the other components that I mentioned. Teachers can use digital storytelling circles, book trailers, and the other research-based strategies that I mentioned to help students make important gains in literacy. Okay, I want to leave some time because I think we have about 10 minutes or so left. I want to give you an opportunity to ask me any questions, and I will be around a little bit after if you want to ask me more questions. But before I conclude, let me give everybody my email. So if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, I can send it to you. And also, at the end of my PowerPoint here, I have the references that I used for this research. And these are also the references that I used to write that paper I was telling you about. And this is my email. It's basically my first name dot my last name at usm.edu. And that concludes my presentation. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.